So I'm Nina Champion, I'm the director of the Criminal Justice Alliance. We're an alliance of over 160 organisations working across the criminal justice system for a fairer and more effective criminal justice system. And our definition of a fair and effective criminal justice system is one that is safe, smart, person-centred, restorative and trusted. And it's that final aspect, trusted, that we're going to focus on today and explore how police and crime commissioners and community organisations can work together to build trust and confidence and tackle race disparity. So I want to thank Equal for inviting us to host this event today, along with the Centre for Justice Innovation. Some of you may have attended the Time to Talk series of events that Equal held, discussing problems related to race disparity in the criminal justice system. And this follow-up series, called Time to Act, is focused on solutions and positive ways forward. And that's the focus of the discussion today, solutions. In particular, how community organisations can work together with newly elected police and crime commissioners to co-produce and develop in collaboration police and crime plans in order to build into those plans from an early stage actions that help to tackle race inequality and build trust. And we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers this morning who very kindly agreed to share their learning with us, including 3 inspiring young people from Leaders Unlocked. And I say learning because this work is hard. There are no easy solutions. There are no silver bullets that can build trust or tackle race inequality overnight. And working in collaboration, especially when there's a history of mistrust and inequality, is hard, and it can be uncomfortable and challenging. But I believe that it's vital to do for collaboration if we want to break down those barriers, and in particular to build back better after the pandemic. So the idea of today is therefore to explore where people, our speakers, have tried to do this, to reflect on what worked well and what didn't, to learn from others, and for everyone on this call to think about how they might go about working in collaboration to tackle race inequality and build trust in their area. I'm going to ask at the end of this event for people to pop in the chat one positive action that they're going to take away from the event today. So be thinking about that as you're listening to the speakers. I'm also delighted to welcome today as well as one of our speakers, the MOJ Race Disparity team, who are going to be discussing some new guidance for police and crime commissioners on services, particularly for Black, Asian and minority ethnic victims of crime. And this work was in part inspired by a roundtable that the Criminal Justice Alliance held with some of our members and the race disparity team at the MOJ nearly 2 years ago. So it's great to see this important work coming to fruition and to give them an opportunity to talk more about this work too. So before I introduce our first panel of speakers, just some quick housekeeping. I've got everyone on mute in order that presenters can speak without interruption, but we do have time after each panel for questions. So if people have questions, please do pop them in the chat and then we'll come back to those at the end of each panel. Also, I'd like to say, please use the chat function respectfully. These topics can be emotive and challenging, but the idea of today's event is to have an open and honest discussion, learning from where things have worked well and what haven't for the benefit of everybody. And so I'd be really grateful if questions and comments are respectful of that. We've got lots of lots to cover, so I'm going to be really strict with timings and give speakers a 1-minute warning before the 10 minutes is up to make sure that we get time for questions. So I'm going to start with our first panel. And our first speakers on the panel are Amal Ali, who's our policy officer at the Criminal Justice Alliance, and Duncan Lugton, who's head of policy and public affairs at the Centre for Justice Innovation. And they're going to help set the scene for the discussion this morning, talking about our recent joint briefing, Public Safety, Public Trust, with a focus on the recommendations and case studies focused on tackling race inequality and building trust. So I'm going to pass over to Amal and Duncan, and I think Jamie, you're going to share your slides for them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nina, and thank you, Jamie. Thanks everybody for hosting. So I'm here to introduce the Public Safety, Public Trust document that our two organisations produced. There's going to be a link in the chat just coming up now so that you can access that. And this document showcases a range of good practice and ideas across a number of areas that PCCs can draw on when they're thinking about what they might want to do. It's got a particular focus on ideas that involve working together with community and voluntary sector organisations and making use of that unique convening role of PCCs. And today we've only got time to give a flavour really of what's in the document, and it's got two specific sections that speak most directly to race, race inequality, but that's a theme that really runs throughout the document. So I'll now hand over to Amal. Take the next slide, the next page, please.
Thanks, Duncan. So before moving on to some of those case studies, we wanted to highlight this piece of important work that our colleagues BTEG undertook as part of the Young Review. So they'd actually conducted a race equality audit on all police and crime plans back in 2017. And amongst other key findings, what they'd found was actually only about a quarter made reference to Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, and only 6 plans of the 42 highlighted demographic and ethnic breakdown for their area. And what this really showed is that the topic needs to be brought up on the agenda. We don't know if there are plans to repeat this work, and I'm also mindful that this was undertaken back in 2017, so would hope that the landscape would have changed. Next slide, please. So as part of our briefing, we looked at building trust in policing across all communities. So in the UK, we have a model of policing that is by consent. So in order for the police to fulfil their functions, they require public approval, and say where legitimacy is undermined, this essentially impacts on trust and confidence and builds this wall of silence where people who are either victims of crime or witnesses to crime aren't forthcoming with that information. And what we do know is that there's evidence of low levels of trust and confidence in policing amongst certain groups, so particularly amongst young people and those from Black, Asian and ethnic minority groups. But across different areas, this is measured differently. So in some areas, they do this by force. Sometimes this data is monitored and collected by PCCs, and sometimes it's collected nationally. So what we do know from the national data, from the data that was collected in 2019, is that people from a Black and mixed background were less likely to have trust in their local police force than those who are of a white or Asian background. And I know that we have colleagues from OPCCs joining us this morning, and they might want to start to think about how this is being measured in their area. You know, how will you demonstrate that trust and confidence has improved in, say, 3 or 4 years' time? So we do have the public sector equality duty, which essentially aims to ensure that public authorities are thinking about things such as trust, but as well as trust also, and to eliminate discrimination, there's an obligation to foster good relations between those who have a protected characteristic and those who do not. And again, colleagues will want to start perhaps thinking about how equality impact assessments that are hopefully to be attached with police and crime plans will be either, say, co-produced with local communities and those who have a protected characteristic, but also how these assessments will influence the design of services. And PCCs are uniquely placed to empower community voice, and they can do this by setting up community scrutiny mechanisms. So an example that I wanted to highlight was the Bedfordshire Scrutiny panel. So in the image, I know Montel is joining us this morning. So that is Montel, who is the chair of the Bedfordshire Scrutiny or Stop and Search Scrutiny panel. And they were actually amongst the first panels to review body-worn video footage, and they also provide independent feedback to police officers. They have a traffic light grading system on the delivery of the legal requirements. So say a stop and search had been carried out, they would grade this green, amber or red. So yes, next slide, please. So we also looked at tackling racial inequality. So we know that there have been numerous reviews finding that those who are from Black or ethnic minority background have worse outcomes in our criminal justice system. And one of those reports being the LAMI review, and we're lucky enough to have Desmond, who is part of the LAMI scrutiny panel set up in Avon and Somerset, who will be talking about this a little bit more later on. But it's been over 22 years since the Macpherson inquiry, and that inquiry first making a recommendation around increasing representation in the police force. So we know that Black, Asian and ethnic minority people are overrepresented in our criminal justice system, but underrepresented in our criminal justice workforce. I'm aware that there's currently an uplift programme which aims to make our police forces more diverse and more representative, but there's still a continued low number of Black officers, particularly Black women in the police force, and the CJA is actually doing a specific piece of work around workforce diversity. So it's not just about, getting bums on chairs. It isn't just about recruitment, but it's about recruitment, retention, and then progression. And we're also, there's evidence out there that there is this revolving door, essentially, of voluntary resignations and a high level of dismissals of Black and ethnic minority officers from the police force. So it's about how are you going to ensure that there's a culture that's inclusive and accepting. But again, this links back to trust and confidence in the system and in policing in particular. So it makes it harder for the police to build a more diverse workforce if there is this sense of injustice, that certain groups and certain communities are over-policed and underprotected, and then what's the likelihood in those groups of people seeing policing as a career option. But I wanted to highlight an example from South Wales. So South Wales PCC and the force there actually have a positive action programme where they prepare candidates who wish to join the force who are from an ethnic minority background and provide them with guidance, support, and even a mentor. And what this has resulted in is a greater appointment of ethnic minority officers. Next slide, please. So another aspect that we looked at as part of the briefing was reducing the harm caused by drugs. So this year actually marks the 50th anniversary of the Misuse of Drugs Act. So we've had half a century of prohibition, which has unfortunately resulted in a disproportionate application of drug law enforcement. So if you're Black, you're 9 times more likely to be stopped for drugs. And there are similar rates in terms of more thorough and intimate searches or strip searches. If you're Black, you're also more likely to be prosecuted for drug possession offences. This is despite people from, say, a Black community having lower rates of self-reported drug use. And PCCs are uniquely placed to not only prevent drug-related harm through, say, the provision of naloxone or needle and exchange programs or heroin-assisted treatment, but they can also reduce the cost of drugs to society. And I wanted to highlight this case study from the West Midlands where they have a diversion scheme, so divert. So they divert those who are caught in possession of a controlled drug to an educational or a drug outreach program rather than putting them formally through the criminal justice system. So not only does that save the taxpayer money, but it also, again, reduces the potential for harm. And as well as having that program, they are also measuring who is benefiting from the scheme, because essentially there is a level of discretion. But again, it's ensuring that everybody has equal access to diversion. So I'm going to now hand back over to my colleague, Duncan.
Thank you. If we could have the next slide, please. So obviously don't need to rehearse to anyone on this call the impact of the pandemic, and also looking forward to how important kind of recovery, transition to a new normal is going to be. But this briefing document does highlight really that crucial role that PCCs can and will continue to play in the ongoing recovery and the shift back to a new way of doing things. Obviously, there are a number of examples in the document, but Warwickshire PCC is funding a really interesting initiative that is covered in the document. I'd encourage people to check that out. If we can have the next slide, please. So on violence and exploitation, there's obviously been recent expansion of VRUs, and there's a lot to think about really in making the most success of those. In this area in particular, some of the key ideas are about how to build in lived experience into how the VRUs are being run and operated, but also to think about what peer-led models, which are representative of ethnic minority groups, might be able to do. The briefing document mentions the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit that's been around for a while and is a really great source of inspiration and ideas. And the document also gives some coverage to county lines and what some of the initiatives that are attempting to address that. So St Giles Trust, for instance, their SOS project, it offers intensive support to vulnerable young people, and this support is provided by carefully selected, professionally trained individuals who come from similar backgrounds to the young people they're supporting. And this works in partnership with the police and other agencies to tackle the exploitation of children and young people through county lines. So that's a really powerful example that is showcased in the document. If I could have the next slide, please. So on supporting victims of crime, again, just to give a flavour of some of the things that are in the document and that can be thought about in this area. Evidence shows that restorative justice can reduce reoffending, improve victim satisfaction and feelings of fairness, whilst also holding those who have caused harm to account. And PCCs can make these services particularly effective by providing active leadership and bringing together a range of relevant organisations to deliver these services and make them really a success. So we've got some examples in the document. For instance, Restorative Gloucestershire is doing some really interesting work here. One question to flag for today is how OPCCs are best measuring access to restorative justice for ethnic minority groups. And later in this meeting, we'll be hearing from Ministry of Justice colleagues who will be discussing their guidance for PCCs on commissioning services for Black, Asian and minority ethnic victims of crime. If we could have the next slide, please. So breaking the cycle of reoffending. I won't need to rehearse all the background here for everyone on the call, but as we know, people often commit crime due to underlying issues in their lives, such as drug or alcohol dependence, mental and physical health issues, housing or homelessness, or problems with money or relationships. So the document outlines a number of initiatives in the vein of early intervention and helping break that cycle of reoffending, such as diversion schemes and such as advice and support models. Checkpoint and CAS Plus are a couple of examples that are mentioned there. Recent evidence does suggest that these type of projects reduce both reoffending and the financial costs of the criminal justice system, but their use varies significantly across the country. And there's also a disproportionality issue here, as set out, for instance, in recent research by the Centre for Justice Innovation. Our Equal Diversion report showed that access to diversion schemes is not entirely equal, and there's some really important work to be done to unpick exactly what's going on there. There are some issues such as around admission of guilt that's often required by these sorts of schemes, and that's connected to low levels of trust in policing by ethnic minority groups. So that's a set of issues that are worth digging into. And a related question to consider is how OPCCs are collecting ethnicity data on out-of-court disposal use to really understand these issues on the ground in their areas and what they mean. We'll be linking to this research and the recent study on the checkpoint scheme and its effectiveness in the chat momentarily. And I'll now hand back to you, Nina.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amal and Duncan. That's a really good whistle-stop tour of some of the main issues. But now I do encourage people to look at the public safety, public trust briefing, which has a lot more detail and lots of other sort of case studies and useful resources referenced in it. And yeah, thanks for people writing things in the chat. We'll help to circulate some of the slides and some of the information about the scheme in the West Midlands. So I'm now going to pass on to our next speaker, Natasha Plummer, Natasha is Head of Community Engagement at MOPAC, and she's going to be talking about a community co-production approach. So Natasha leads a team focused on bringing community voices together to influence and improve policing and community safety. And most recently, she's been involved in helping to develop an action plan to improve trust and confidence in the Met and address community concerns about disproportionate use of certain police powers, particularly affecting Black Londoners. So it's my pleasure to pass on to Natasha.
Good morning. I'm just going to share my slides. System's a bit slow. There we go. Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much for having me along today. As Nina said, I'm the Head of Engagement at the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. And for those who may not be aware, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. And so MOPAC, where I work, is the body that exists to support him in those functions. So MOPAC is in effect the OPCC for London. Now I'm going to talk this morning about a co-production approach that we took recently last year around a particular piece of work that we were leading on. I'm going to talk about the importance of co-production in the work of PCCs in tackling racial disparity, and I'm really going to reframe that as trying to demonstrate the value of co-production to the work that I do and the work that others like me in the public sector do. So, thinking about the work of police and crime commissioners, we have really broad powers. We set the budget and the strategic direction for the police in our area. So in my case, that's for London. And we're required to produce a police and crime plan which sets out our strategic plans for the 4-year term. But PCCs do much more besides. They are required to consult on the police and crime plan, but there's no prescription about how we do that in law. We're also required to consult on the budget, but again, there's no prescription about how we do that in law. So there's lots of opportunity. Now, traditionally, we tend to rely on kind of quite traditional methods that you will all be familiar with, I'm sure. Processes of formal consultations. You put out a document, you maybe do a survey, get your feedback in, and you kind of mix that up and you come out with the answer at the end. We also have a number of groups in London that might be standing committees. So, for instance, community monitoring groups that look at stop and search, similar to what Montel does in Bedfordshire, for instance, or ward panels, some of you may be aware of. We might also do things like ad hoc events. So in London, we've run various ad hoc events and roundtables and sometimes short surveys focused on particular issues. So in the last couple of years, for instance, we've done quite a bit of work around the impact of Brexit and the pandemic on hate crime victimisation, for instance. And that was kind of, bubbling up issues that we then held roundtables on in an ad hoc way. We talked about them for a while, worked out what we needed to do, and then we kind of put those to bed. And then we have, kind of a number of surveys that we run on a long-term basis. And now they used to measure these things nationally, trust and confidence, things like that, victim satisfaction, and there used to be national targets around that. We don't have national targets anymore, but we have continued to measure them in London. So we have some of the longest running surveys in the country, probably the longest. And we have our public attitude survey, which measures trust and confidence using a range of measures, but also allows us to ask people about their general views about policing and the safety of their areas. And we have a victim satisfaction survey, which then talks to people who've received policing services and asks them about, how satisfied they were with the service they received. So if you've got all of these traditional methods, what other things can you do? And I think one of the most interesting for me is that co-production approach. And there's quite a lot of talk about that at the moment, but I guess the question is, what is that really? What does that really mean? So for me, there are, many definitions for co-production, but for me, it's an approach where communities and commissioners, so people like me who work in a public authority and have budgets to spend on buying services and things, we work together in an equal way with communities, sharing influence, skills and experience to design and deliver and monitor services and projects, in this case, policing. Importantly, the co-production approach acknowledges that people who use the service will bring both knowledge and experience that will make the service better for themselves and others. So moving away from the idea that professionals have all the answers, somehow because we work in the space, we will know everything, and actually looking to people who use the service to understand what they need, how the service should operate, what doesn't work well for them and how we should change it. So last year, just looking at a particular example, kind of in the summer of last year, we led a number of workshops looking at the experience of Black communities and policing. It was off the back of mounting evidence, both quantitative data that we've been compiling over many years, but also qualitative data that was starting to come back to us through communities, pointing to the disproportionate experiences of policing, particularly amongst Black communities. Now we've known about this; it's been an ongoing problem, but there have been in recent years some of those measures, things are starting to slide. And we know that our existing mechanisms are not fully representative of our communities, but we also know those experiences are very different. So we know that Black people in London are 3 times more likely to be stopped and searched, and we know that they have lower levels of trust and confidence in the police than either white or Asian communities. So we needed to find other ways to access these points of views and to understand those experiences and to think about how we could target our work to address them. So I led a series of workshops. We spoke to over 400 people just looking at the impact of policing on Black communities. And we targeted, a wide variety of rights groups, youth organisations, community groups, and brought them together for a number of deliberative workshop sessions. We also included our staff body in that. City Hall has over 1,000 people working there, and they bring not just expertise, but also real experience as Londoners themselves in many cases. This was a really collaborative process. We brought together lots of different people, and we brought them together also with police officers so that they, who also sometimes are recipients of the service, but also as the people who deliver it, could be in those conversations and understand the issues that people were bringing forward. And the key thing about these workshops was that what we really tried to do was lift the lid on people's experiences and to understand that. We knew what we knew from the data, but what we wanted to say to people was, we think these are the problems. We think that, Black people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We know from the data that they're, disproportionately impacted by particular aspects of policing. Are they the problems as you perceive them? Have we understood them correctly? Have we heard you? What would you want us to do about them? So actually not sitting in a room and deciding, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z, but actually asking the people with those experiences what would make things better. And then also thinking about, well, if we know what we want to do, when do we want to do it? How do we do it? And in what order? Now, that work in, as Nina mentioned earlier, the Mayor's Action Plan for Improving Trust, Accountability and Transparency in Policing. And we worked together to build that. And that kind of covers off 4 key areas for us. So one is around better policing, which is work that's focused on the way in which police tactics are used and trying to reduce disproportionality for Black people in the use of those tactics. The second is about working together to make Black communities safer. And that's all about how we engage communities both as MOPAC, but also as the police service, and involve them in the work that happens at the local level. The third section is focused on building a police service that better reflects and understands Black communities. So that's all about representation, but also about cultural competence and how officers are able to understand the community contexts in which they do their work, particularly in London, where we have the largest force and we have a lot of people working here who are not from London, and they may be parachuted into, a very diverse local community, and actually they need to understand the dynamics of that. And then the last section was about holding the police to account for what they do. So that's looking at both the scrutiny and the oversight that we do as MOPAC and how we help the public to understand what happens and that it does take place, but also thinking about how we better involve the community and more diverse communities in that work. So that work is all ongoing. It's not a sort of short-term project, so we're in for the long haul. But it was a really exciting way of working, and we took a number of lessons from that. I was thinking about this last week, and I suppose the kind of the key thing, the first thing that you have to recognise, is that co-production is a more deliberative and involving process. It's a more empowering approach that seeks to level up the playing field. So as a PCC, you need to be prepared to give up some of your power. But that's the essence of trust. So if we're trying to build trust and confidence, if we're trying to reduce racial disparities, we need to be opening up the door and allowing others to share some of that power. But it also allowed us to develop a shared understanding and expectations for delivery. So as I said, asking people what they perceived the problems to be and were they the same things that we understood, all getting on the same page about those issues, what we needed to do about them. But it was also an opportunity, I think, for people to have a better understanding of how policing actually operates, because often people don't understand the parameters and the scope within which policing operates, which can hamper how the police operate and how they can change. And actually, it's an opportunity for people to have a better understanding of that and also to challenge, but certainly to understand that better. But co-production approaches also allow you to hone in and amplify the diversity of voices. So as I said, we knew that our existing groups were not necessarily as representative of all the communities that exist in London. So we were able to identify those communities that were missing and actually go out and find them, and actually having a deliberate conversation with them and being really focused about that. And as I said, this particular piece of work was focused on Black communities, and very purposefully so. It also helped us to identify further gaps in our knowledge. So we already knew we had some gaps, and this work sought to address some of those. But through this work, it also became apparent that there were two other groups where, again, we need to hone in even further to get to the number of the issues. And that was around the experiences of Black women in policing. And so we had Black women in these conversations, but the conversations were still often very focused on the experiences of Black men and boys. So there's something about how we amplify the voices of Black women's experiences particularly. And the second was around Black people from the LGBTQI community. And indeed, the whole gamut of intersectionality that you can have within that. And so there are areas there for us to do more work, and we've been able to identify those and be really kind of focused on knowing that we have those gaps. And the two final bits I would say is, as I said, a co-production approach can enable you to extend your networks into new communities through the cascade effect. So we deliberately went out and found people that we weren't talking to. You know, we said, actually, who do we know? Who's out there? Who else can we be speaking to? Let's go and find them. And we spent a lot of time doing that. That meant we were connected up with communities and organisations that we hadn't been speaking to directly, who I think probably because they weren't present in our existing structures, probably thought we weren't interested in hearing from them. So actually the act of going out and finding them let them know that we did care about their views, and it opened up that line of communication, and also I think encouraged them to talk to other people about the work that was happening and to be routes into our work and back out. So, you know, we're getting a lot more community intel through that, and we're able to kind of talk to people in a more full way about all the work that we're doing. And then the final piece I'd say is that the most important thing I think about the co-production approach and the work we did last summer was that it enables community agency and puts everyone on a more even footing. I think the thing that we have to understand as policymakers is that actually we don't know the answer to everything, and we really need to value that contribution of the citizen expert. Only they can know their experience. So whatever we think happens, or however we think it should work, we need to know whether that is what actually happens on the ground. And the only way of knowing that is to ask the people who receive the service. And I think that's probably the most important lesson for police and crime commissioners. We spend a lot of time in strategic conversations, you know, we spend a lot of time with senior police officers, you know, and people sort of at this level telling us how things should be and giving us views. But actually, you need to get right back to the ground and be asking your public, is this what you experience? What else needs to happen? How else can we improve and deliver for you, you know, our constituents, our electorate? And I think the final word I'd say on this, Nina, is that for police and crime commissioners, you know, I recognise that it is a challenge. Giving up power is a hard thing to do. And particularly, I think in this term, because the election was delayed by a year because of COVID, it's a much shorter term. And obviously we operate in a political environment. So, you know, there is pressure for delivery, and co-production can feel like it takes too long. But my advice would be the investment at upfront will be worth it in the long run. So don't be put off by the fact that it might take longer than you'd want it to. Thank you.
Brilliant. Wise words there, absolutely. Excellent. So I'm going to now pass on to Desmond Brown, who's the independent chair for the Avon and Somerset LAMI Review Group, and they provide strategic direction and coordination across partner agencies to reform racial disparity in Avon and Somerset's criminal justice service. And Desmond's got a whole range of experience sitting as the first chair of the Commission for Race Equality and sitting on various independent scrutiny panels, as well as having created Growing Futures, a community interest company. So I'm going to pass over to you, Desmond, because I know that we're sort of pushing time, but you've got your slide up. Excellent.
Thank you, Nina, and thank you for the other speakers. Really interesting, and kind of taken some of my words away from me, but it's great. So my name is Desmond Brown. What I'll do, I haven't got very long to cover such a large area, but I'm going to rattle through it. So a brief introduction of myself, and then I set the context of the criminal justice system, and then an overview of the work that we've done on the LAMI Review in Avon and Somerset, and then how we move forward, and how we take it more seriously, this work around disproportionality. Have the next slide, please. So, as I said, my name is Desmond Brown, if you can hit it again for me. So I set up Growing Futures in 2014, working with young people involved in serious youth violence as victims or perpetrators, their families as well, dealing with young people who've been excluded. In 2017, the OPCC set up the Scrutiny of Police Powers, which looked at tasers and stop and search, and I think David Woodward, who's the chair, is on this call. Later that year, I became the first chair of the Commission of Race Equality that looked into discrimination across Bain groups in Bristol, focused on education, employment, health, including mental health, housing and criminal justice. In 2018, I was lucky enough to go up to Scotland to look at the VRU unit there, and came back and along with Deputy Mayor Asher Craig and Andy Bennett, who was the commander of Bristol at the time, we set up the VRU in Bristol. And later that year, I became chair of the Avon and Somerset Lammy Review. If we go to the next slide. So I thought I'd start off with this quote from the Ministry of Justice in response to the Lammy Review. An effective justice system depends on procedural fairness. Equitable treatment at every stage in the criminal justice process is essential. And a society that cannot trust its institutions to protect the people and treat them fairly cannot effectively control the crime that we rightly fear. And we've heard trust, and I'll be talking about trust a little later on. If we go to the next slide. So the criminal justice system it is a large beast, and obviously to cover for the Lammy Review, it was quite a big project. So in 2017, I was working at Growing Futures. I woke up in February of that year to the news of a tasering of a 63-year-old man, a black man in Bristol. And it kind of really, at the age of 48 at the time, it really stirred me that this misidentification that it later turned out to be, and the fact he was tased in the face, that this was still happening to a black man at 63, a grandfather of 3. And so that really kind of ignited my passion, and I set up the Justice for Judah campaign and really galvanised people in Bristol who were very, very upset. And what we kept hearing was enough is enough. The scrutiny panel was set up, and it's looked at body-worn video. And at the time, I think it was around 20% of body-worn video was being used. I'm happy to say through the scrutiny panel and the leadership of David Woodward, we are now at 95% of all body-worn is being used. There's still some issues about people switching it on, but it's a great leap with 4 years. And that has come with the police trusting the scrutiny and of the community. Initially, I think there was a bit of a fear that this would be a bashing shot against the police. But out of our scrutiny, we fed back to officers through sergeants, good practice, but we were able to flag up some areas of concern: compliant handcuffing, use of taser, red dotting, and along the way we managed to also empower ourselves and our community by learning, as was mentioned earlier, about police process. If we have the next one, please. So I don't need to tell you about the Lammy Review, the 35 recommendations. It's just interesting that in 2020 we had the Stuart Hall Foundation report that talked about 589 recommendations being made in 13 reviews since the Scarman Review in 1981, and out of those there's 389 recommendations still to be implemented. And David Lammy also said in 2020 that he felt that the government had said that the recommendations were going well. He said that hardly any of them have been implemented, and he talks about this idea of lip service, and actually what we need to see is measurable change on the ground. If you can click it again for me. So Avon and Somerset Lammy Group was set up in 2018 in response to the Lammy Review, and I was appointed in 2019. As part of that, there were 3 pillars: building trust, deliver fairness, and share responsibility. If you hit the next slide. So my remit under those 3 pillars was to bring together regional criminal justice partners and produce a data picture of the journey of Bain people through the criminal justice system with Avon and Somerset to proactively address issues of disparity. Now, at this point, I thought that we were in a place with data, and again, this is as a layperson, where the data was just sitting somewhere in a cupboard that I could open it up and we would have it all. This wasn't the case, to be honest. Data was very high level in some cases, and some cases we had the 18+1 ethnicity categories. But for this review to compare, we had to move up to the higher level purely because criminal justice partners weren't collecting the same data. Can we go on to the next slide? So just a bit about the stakeholders and governance. The Lammy Review was set up and is governed by the OPCC with major help from the Avon Somerset Constabulary, but sits underneath the partnership of the local Criminal Justice Board. Within that, we've got the priorities, which I'll come on to in a minute, but our key stakeholders are vast, isn't at all the whole list. The Cabinet Office of Disparity have really helped us out, but we've got local groups, Commission on Race Equality, Bristol City Council, and other groups like that within our subgroup. If we click on. So in 2019, after an initial scoping of available data, we picked these themes which show the most disparity. Now, obviously, stop and search wasn't part or youth justice of the Lammy Review, but David Lammy had particular concern around youth justice and stop and search. As stop and search is really the first place where people come in contact with the criminal justice system, and the legitimacy of stop and search really affects how people view the criminal justice system. So we were looking at disparity within Avon and Somerset Force area. There was some major disparity in Somerset, where compared to the population, we were looking at 30 times more likely to be stopped if you were a Bain person. Again, we have to recognise that the 2011 census data is probably massively out of date. If we look in Bristol alone, the Somali community in 2011, the school age community was seen at 8%. We're now talking about maybe 22% upwards after this next census. We looked at the judiciary, and again, this was one of Lammy's points. We were very lucky to have Judge Blair, who is the recorder for Bristol, who was on the subgroup and was able to help us to look at sentencing data. And we actually are running a project now where we were going to be able to look at sentencing data and data sets for our area that look at outcomes across ethnicities. Prisons, again, we have 3 prisons in our area. We have an open prison, Lay Hill, we have HMP Bristol, and we have a female prison, Eastwood Park. Again, around this, they're completely different institutions, so we had to look at them as individual prisons, and that was another finding around data. HR element of this came a bit later. We did have it tagged on to each of the priority themes, but what happened was we realised that this was such a major area, and around this we're looking at the life cycle across all our criminal justice partners around HR. Out of court disposals was another area in the Lammy Review when we looked at how that was being rolled out, looking at how people who from Bain communities, how they access that, and the issues that David Lammy wrote about trust, and again, trust comes up again. So that's a real quick whistle tour through that. If we go to the next slide. Now, part of the product of this Lammy Review is a click app. Now, Avon and Somerset Constabulary are very data rich. This is based on their click app system, but this is when I spoke to David Lammy and mentioned it was a click app, a Lammy app, he did laugh, and I didn't realise that it would sound strange if he had his own app. But this app is really real life data, can be fed into it, and we can actually drill into areas of disproportionality and different groups. So this will go across all the themes, and this will be ready for the new census data, so that when it's fed in, we can see straight away where areas of disparity lie, and we can kick off from running. And this is really the prize at the end of this, is actually having data where we can actually actually drill into it and actually understand what's going on. Go on to the next slide. So moving forward, I mean, the biggest issue, as I said at the beginning, was data. The methodology around any examination of disparity, we need to have an agreement around data. And a lot of this was thought to be in place already. Unfortunately, what we found that as we got down to deadlines, data was missing or couldn't be shared, even though we had been told that was going on. And one of the biggest issue is that we have data and we have, as I said, lip service from the top tables, but when it gets down to local level and driving that data, there is little understanding of disproportionality in some places. There's other places it's really good, but even how with this data, people don't understand how to use it or what disparity, as I said, means. So there needs to be a real concerted effort to actually tie this up, to put our money where our mouth is and resource this, looking at disparity and looking into the causes of it urgently. And one of the issues that we had was we weren't resourced properly. Now, I have to say that even the Somerset Constabulary have bent over backwards to help us, but still we were promised 2 analysts full time. I think we got 2 part-time analysts, and I work 1 day a week on the LAMI, which obviously, because of my passion, I do much more than that. But we really need to start looking at how we address this. If we're going to talk about trust, communities feel that their concerns aren't really being efficiently or effectively dealt with. And as we mentioned before, that qualitative data, we pulled this into report. We did workshops around stop and search, for instance, which really got underneath some of the issues that communities feel. And these are the same things that have been said for 40 years. Data alone won't be the silver bullet. It is overarching and it's really important, but we need to value qualitative data as much as we value the quantitative data, because there is gaps in data. We are not all using the same ethnicity categories. So as I say, we have to go back to the higher level 5+1 data in some cases, which isn't satisfactory. And as I said, I really thought we would be further down the line with data. And I did go through an emotional time as part of this report. But again, this report is benchmarking where we are in Avon and Somerset with criminal justice. So resourcing is really important. I think that we need people who are driving locally, who understand disproportionality and can ask the right questions. There's no point in having data if we're not asking the right questions, because all we are doing is playing the game of solving this problem. I think I'm probably about up to time.
Thank you, Desmond. That's fantastic. That's
sorry, yeah. It's such a big topic, so apologies.
Absolutely. No, you both did great. I've noted a few questions that are in the chat, so I'm just going to put those to yourself and Natasha, and also if Marl and Duncan want to come in. So we had a question that was from Sandra, talking about sort of consultations and focus groups tend to predefine the agenda, and often that can have some sort of red lines drawn by the police before that. So something around kind of how do you avoid, kind of having the agenda sort of predefined in a co-production approach. There was a question about how to address the real anger and frustration, especially by over-policed communities. So how do you address that? So if maybe go to those couple first, and then I'll go to the next couple of questions that came off. So one about kind of not having a predefined agenda, and a second one about how do you sort of address the real anger and frustration of communities. Who'd like to take that one first? Natasha?
Should I go? Yeah, I'll go
Thanks,
first.
Natasha.
On the predefined agenda piece, I think that's a really good question. And I think that's the challenge really of culture and approach, because I think co-production is it can be quite challenging, I think, for the police service to engage in. It's a command and control organisation. They tell people what to do. That's what they do all day long. So this idea that you're going to sort of just let it go and let the public tell you what they want and what they should do, I think is a little bit difficult sometimes for them to get their heads around. And I kind of appreciate that, because that's kind of the culture of the organisation. So it's a slowly drip. The way in which we try to get around that is obviously when we're working with them, we really try and get them to open up, have early conversations with them about how we're going to approach things so that we can actually be clear about what it is that we're offering to people. And if it isn't going to be open, then let's not call it co-production. Let's call it what it is. It's a consultation. So it's about being honest. On the point about the sort of traumatized and over-policed communities, I suppose there's a couple of things, and how do you kind of deal with the culture of policing? I think, we have to approach it with openness and honesty. I think that has to be the way forward, really. And one of the things that I find really powerful is that when you get people into rooms with each other, that can dissipate quite a lot of that anger, as long as people have come to that conversation with honesty. So, actually, if you've come to that conversation to listen, and that's really evident to the people that you're talking to, that can really help to take out some of that anger. And then you can start talking about what the actual issues are and what you want to do with them, about them. In terms of the culture, I think one of the two things really that the police service needs to do, and this is certainly true of London, but it's probably true everywhere. One is kind of try and get in a position where they're less defensive about everything. Sometimes when someone's telling you a problem, it's not a sort of pointy finger thing. It's you need to know this because you need to do something about it. So don't take great umbrage, be open about it, less adversarial, and respond effectively to the challenge. And then the second thing is about the cultural competence. And I mentioned that when I was talking earlier, that actually people need to understand the communities that they're working with, and understand, basic things about the way people will talk to you, and how they might be quite frustrated and animated, but that's not necessarily a kind of personal challenge to you, and actually how you respond to that will really matter and change the tone of that conversation. But those things will take a long time to bear fruit. There's training in the Met looking at cultural competence and helping people to kind of understand the diversity of their communities. A lot of that is being led by people from local communities, so almost like an induction and an introduction to your local area. These are the people that you're going to be working with, but it will take a while before it will bear fruit, or indeed if it will know whether it works. But you have to be in it to win it, so we have to try. Thanks.
Right, thanks, Natasha. Desmond, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just disagree with what Natasha said. I think with co-production, though, I think we've got to move away from the safe options. I think that we always talk about, and I hear it quite a lot, that hard to reach communities. I see them every day. They're not hard to reach for me. And I think that this idea, if you look at Scrutiny, I work with people involved with yacht orders, and I sit on their panels with them. A lot of them are great people, but they are from a certain demographic and a certain age group. Usually retired white women sitting on panels for a lot of scrutiny. So I've been working with David Wood, with the chair of the SOT panel, is looking at younger people who are affected by, for instance, stop and search. Looking at, we've gone to the PD professional standards to look at young people who have made complaints, to see if we can get them in to be part of the panel. Because again, this idea of trust, people don't make complaints because they don't trust that the system's going to work. So there has to be a work around that. And what Natasha said about being fragile, we've seen in the last few weeks, with stuff in the Met, with the Morgan and the institutional corruption idea, that this idea of protecting the brand of policing against all comers. I think the police have to go back to that Pelian principles, that they are the community in uniform. And I think that I understand that protectionism, but it really, really backfires, because communities expect that protectionism, and it fuels issues that aren't even there. It's just another, let's happening again, and I will disengage from the process. So I think it is showing some wounds, opening up and taking some of the hits, because this is our police force. It's not a separate organisation, it is us. And then on the frustrated communities, well, they've got a right to be frustrated. If you look at half of all stop and searches in my area are personal drug searches for possession. And if you look at the statistics around how many black men are being stopped and then nothing being found, it's 63% with no further action. And these aren't, as we were promised by Theresa May in 2015, intelligence-led stops and searches. These are officer-led. It's almost going back to the old sus law, where basically it's down to that officer to decide who to stop. But we're not stopping the organised crime gangs. We're stopping people for a little bit of weed. I'm not taking away from the great job that police officers do, and they will say that stop and search is a valuable tool. I would disagree because the evidence sometimes points in the opposite direction. So I would say that communities have a right to be angry, and I think they shouldn't be fobbed off and told not to be, because there are issues that have come up through the data, through the lived experience, that have been there for 40 years.
Thank you both. I've just got another set of questions before we move on to our second panel. So there's been a couple of questions from Peter and Montel. You've covered a little bit of this in your first answers, but sort of really asking the question about what needs to change in the culture of policing to address these challenges. We had a specific question about involvement of people, Rastafarian people from the Rastafari faith. We had a question about body-worn video and about access of scrutiny panels to body-worn video in particular, whether I know that there's been some issues around lack of access due to issues around GDPR, but how those have been resolved. And then just a final one about residency requirements and sort of for police officers, and whether that would help to address some of the workforce issues. So if you'd like Natasha to go first, just to pick up on any of those points. So
Sure.
culture of policing, involvement of people of Rastafarian faith, and body-worn video.
It's a good question about people of Rastafarian faith, and we do have a couple of organisations in London that we've been in contact with. So there has been some involvement, but I would probably not enough, I'd say, and I don't necessarily think they're well represented amongst our kind of general standing groups. So that's a very good challenge. I think there's a really important point in here about the idea of getting people into rooms and that being PR and not really getting to the point. And that fundamentally speaks to the problem about the culture that we've already picked up on. You know, why are you having these conversations? Is it because, you know, you want to spend all your time defending the position and telling everybody how great it is, or is it because you want to have a genuine conversation about what has gone wrong? And lots of, you know, don't get me wrong, there are lots of local cops who are doing this and they do this well, they get it, they are having those kind of proper problem solving conversations. But I think probably if corporately and at the sort of national and the way things are represented in the press, that all people see is a sort of defensive attitude, then that's the prevailing perception. So it doesn't really matter what a local cop is doing. People will think, you know, generally that it's poor. And so I think that's really, really important. Somebody asked here about residency criteria. So residency criteria are interesting. So we're doing that in London. We have a London only residency requirement, which means that we're recruiting people who've lived in London for the last 3 years. And that is intended to kind of bring both more diversity, and it is doing that. They are increasing their number of Black and minority ethnic recruits coming through, and Black being really important because actually the Met has had quite good success in recruiting minority ethnic people, but they haven't been from Black backgrounds. So, you know, the Bain numbers that we can talk about, which are quite good, are hiding the fact that that's not Black recruits. So there's a lot of work around that. But even if it's not minority ethnic people and they're people from white backgrounds, the fact that they live in London and they're therefore Londoners means that they understand the vibe, you know, they kind of know what London's like. And I think that's really important because people who live outside of London, if you come and police a London neighbourhood, you may have actually preconceived ideas about those places that are not necessarily, you wouldn't have them if you live there. And living there, I think, so that is important in terms of just getting a sense of what it's like to be in London as opposed to maybe living in a home county is a really important point.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm just going to bring Desmond in now. Sorry, I'm just aware of time. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, can you remind me of the questions? Sorry, I didn't write them.
I think Natasha didn't cover one that was around body-worn video, so I think if you could speak a bit about that, that would be great, and then we'll move on to the next one. So
body-worn videos, you know, as I said, it was people very reluctant in the beginning to use them. I think the level of scrutiny, and I think again this is this fear of and when we're talking about race, of being called a racist or some actions being attributed to that. But as I said, I think what has happened is there has been a real culture change in it. So when we sit and do our scrutiny, we have a police officer driving a desk that goes to the needs report. So it's almost like we're sitting in the car with the officers and we see, but we're looking through the lens of the body worn video. So we do get to pick up and you know, the scrutiny group has produced a form where we can actually dissect that interaction and look at it. And to be honest, across a lot of the stops and searches that we look at tasering, we look at under 16 stop and search, the whole use of police powers. The majority of them are really good and standard. There's a few issues around compliant handcuffing and it's like, but where we were 4 years ago to where we are now, the transparency, and I think that we brought the constabulary along with us, because they can really see that we're not there to batter them. We are there to hold them to account, but also to talk about good practice and to push that. And I think that has changed the constabulary's view of scrutiny and co-production. We're still not there, but body-worn video is a great tool for scrutiny. And it makes officers, you know, again, when they're driving to an event, they will now start narrating what is going on, and it's for their protection as much as it is for the community. And I think, again, my last thing I'd like to say is I want to get back to those Pelian principles. I really do. I mean, if we look at some of the research we did for the LAMI, we did a straw poll of 116 officers. And I think, just to flip it on the head, officers were asking for support in stop and search and cultural competence, and they actually understand that they need those skills to be better police officers. So again, I think we need to flip it, because we're always looking at it from the community side. The police are the community, and we need to give them the tools that they need to do their job professionally. And a lot of them do it and want to be more professional. So again, you know, there's a tension between the two.
Great, thank you, Desmond, and thank you, Natasha. I'm going to move on to our second panel now. So we're going to kick off with 3 young people from Leaders Unlocked, who have all got experience of working with police and crime commissioners as part of youth commissions in different parts of the country, working on a range of issues affecting young people, including race inequality. So we've got Shay from Cleveland Youth Commission, we've got Sammy from Cheshire Youth Commission, and I think we've got Jamie Lee from Nottinghamshire Youth Commission. So I'm not sure who's speaking first out of the 3 of you. Do we have Jamie Lee on? I'm not sure if we do, but if we kick off with Shay and Sammy.
On to just organise the presentation. I think she might be filling in if Katie's not here.
Okay.
Katie's not here, sorry.
I think Katie's on the call, but I'm not sure.
If she can hear. Is that what she's? Here we go.
Just need to make Katie a presenter, I think.
Yeah. Oh, we do have Jamie Lee. Good.
Yes.
Could you also make Jamie Lee a presenter then, please? Thank you.
Aha. Hi, Jamie. Sorry, I couldn't see your name. So you're 15 best. Yeah, lovely. Just doing that now for you. I think you're now a presenter, Jamie. Can you share your screen? You need to.
Yeah, but I don't have the slides.
It's Katie.
Oh, it's Katie. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I'm technical. There's just a Katie Kelly on here. Katie. Ah, yes, sorry, found her. Brilliant.
Hey. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, the slides are up now.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just want to, there you go. So my name's Kate Brodie. I am Senior Manager at Leaders Unlocked, and the Youth Commission has been running for since 2013. And I know there's been a lot of talk about engaging young people and a model and co-production. Well, I'm now going to hand you over to 3 Youth Commission members from 3 different areas of the country who are going to talk about how the model of the Youth Commission. So my first person I'm going to hand over to Shay.
Hi. Well, the Youth Commission provides a platform for young people aged 14 to 25 to create a relationship between the police and the young people, and also allows young people a voice within the force to create real change, like life-changing change to the young people that actually matter. I'm going to pass on to Jamie Lee to give how it works.
Sorry, that was my bit. So we start off with doing a bit of end-to-end youth leadership, which basically means like after we get like all the participants, we start making the workshops and kind of really like discovering our priorities and like kind of really setting our plan out in place to know what we want to do in the future. And then we move on to peer-to-peer engagement, and this we call this the big conversation. And it's very important that we get this because this is when we talk to other young people about the issues that we like, how they feel, what issues they feel like they face in their local area, because this really lets us have a very like a range of issues and to deal with, and like lots of opinions. And then we move on to close collaboration with PCCs and police forces, which just like means that we can have kind of like that real relationship with the people that deal with those things day to day and actually face those issues that we are trying to tackle. And then we move on to like the last thing, which is a peer-led conference presenting key findings and recommendations to the PCC, police and partners, followed by a report. And this is basically where we kind of just represent all our results and kind of just show them what we've found, and that way we kind of the issues that we have raised like in the workshops and stuff, we get to represent it, and then they can be sorted out and kind of moved on in the future. Thank you.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself before we move on. So my name is Shamia. I am 25 years old from Hartlepool. What does it really mean to racially abuse someone? Is it shouting abuse at another fellow human in the street? Or is it racial profiling? Or is it just simply holding tighter onto personal belongings when a person of a different ethnicity walks past you? I experience racial abuse almost every day of my life. Even completing simple tasks such as walking or driving, I am bombarded with cacophony of racial slurs. Paki, Kurimunja, nigger. Imagine having this abuse screamed at you by white supremacists that I can guarantee enjoy food from my culture and cultures alike. Just because you mumble your slurs under your breath does not mean I can't hear you. Although you may think I cannot, when attending my local mosque, racial abuse about violence is hurled at my peaceful community. Islam is a religion of peace, not violence. When I was less experienced with racial slurs that fulfill my everyday life, I was actually subjected to physical abuse by racial motivation. Physical abuse ranging from fighting and punching to having items of food launched at me is not okay. It is dehumanizing on every level, but the abuse does not just range from younger in society. It even incorporates the most senior and elderly members of the society. My parents, time after time, experience this abuse. Envision being called a terrorist and being told, get back to your own country when completing necessary day-to-day activities, going for a walk to grocery shopping. Even my own sister have had their hijabs pulled while walking to my auntie's house. Behavior like this in a modern-day society is completely unacceptable. But this isn't even the worst of it all. The most irritating, heartless, racial comment of them all, which is often dismissed as just plain curiosity, is the concept of asking where we actually come from. Despite this comment being innocent enough, this is actually the most disrespectful comment of them all. Simply assuming that a person isn't from where they base solely on the color of their skin is completely and utterly vile and racist. Over my 25 years of life experience, every time I hear these words, I feel utterly degraded and misplaced in a 21st century society which is supposed to support and promote multiculturalism. Due to the blend society immense benefits to not only the economy, but the level of respect and understanding in the society as a whole. The rise of the American election, coronavirus, and Brexit had significantly increased the amount of xenophobia I am exposed to. My parents always warned me not to go out on my own. I am a 25-year-old man, not an 8-year-old boy. I shouldn't have to worry my parents whenever I leave their side due to the amount of racial abuse our community is subjected to. I work in a family-run business that children throw stones and shout racial abuse at, not only to myself, but the staff that work there, which happen to be members of my family, including my younger sister. It is a horrible feeling, powerless, especially in not being able to protect my sister against racial abuse and slurs, while she, like all of us, is just trying to earn a living and give back to the community, even though it treats us so wrongly. In my opinion, the police, although they try their best, are almost futile. Youngsters and others simply are unafraid, so are not receiving an appropriate deterrent and continue to expose us in this animalistic behaviour. I could go on and on about my experience of racial injustice, but for now, this is the chapter in the encyclopedic story of my life and experience of Islamophobia and racism. So that was my story. So more about the Youth Commission if we move on. The Cleveland Youth Commission launched in 2020 and recruited 27 members who identified 5 key priorities, which were mental health, relationship with the police, hate and online crime, drugs and alcohol, and preventing reoffending. The Youth Commission created workshops and delivered them online and gathered 1,200 responses from young people during the national lockdown. The Cleveland police invited Youth Commission members to take part in a use of force scrutiny session that would scrutinize the body cams. The Youth Commission also set up a Youth Commission ethics group as well. So our next step with the Cleveland Youth Commission is to work with the PCC, police and partners to take forward the 36 recommendations made by the Youth Commission members and to act on those recommendations for change. I'm now going to pass you on to Sammy.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. My name's Sammy Aldaba. I'm currently 19 and a member of the Cheshire Youth Commission for Policing and Crime. This presentation by myself will hope to give some insight into what Cheshire accomplishes, aims to seek some of the work that's been done. So in Cheshire, the Youth Commission of 2020 gathered over 3,000 responses during 2 national lockdowns, a time when people were suppressed with their opinions and thoughts, and a time where a lot of people faced austerity as a result of furlough. People faced a series of difficulties with their mental health, on top of the issues that we saw arise, especially in America, surrounding issues of race and inequality. And I think what's most important is to note that despite the world standing still within those lockdowns, the change that needed to happen in the current politics and opinion and perspective didn't have enough of a chance to go forward with it. And this is a part of what the Cheshire Youth Commission hopes to achieve. So established by the Youth Police Advisory Group, it represents a youth voice for independent advisory groups. What the Cheshire Youth Commission attempts to do is to improve the links between the police and the young people that exist within the communities. I'm sure a lot of us would agree here that for as long as time has been around, we've had young people perhaps not getting along with police, perhaps misconstruing ideas or having bad experiences. And obviously we're products of our environments, so young people can't be blamed for having bad experience with the police and therefore not wanting to conduct communications with them. Some of the work that the Cheshire Youth Commission has done has created a film based on stop and search rights, and I think these issues are particularly important in terms of helping young people to understand how they can protect themselves. What are their rights? What's the best approach to using such rights to ensure that people know how they can defend themselves safely without perhaps antagonizing people that will result in a detrimental effect for them. So it's a pragmatic approach to making sure people do understand how we can keep ourselves safe and really benefit when in a stressful situation such as a stop and search. I know personally from experience, if I've been stopped and pulled over, the first question that springs to mind is, but why? Give me a reason, explain to me why. Sometimes if police officers have an attitude to which they're going to do as they like, frustrations and tempers can rise. I think it's important to understand the rights that the police officers have in regards to searching under suspicion and those types of grounds. The Cheshire Youth Commission also acted as lay observers for key policing operations. Members created a survey on police and racism in June, which gathered over 240 responses. The cumulative work of this resulted in 12 key recommendations, which can be seen online in the Cheshire Youth Commission's report. 36 particular recommendations for change, and worked on an action plan with the police. And I think what's important to summarise this point is that the Cheshire Youth Commission is an organisation, or the Youth Commission as a whole, is an organisation that comes up with these ideas, formulates them, articulates them on behalf of the community, and then is able to pass it on to the police in a way that is genuinely listened to. And I think this is just one way of how young people in our communities can have a voice that's genuinely heard. I know for myself, a particular amount of life experience has occurred through the Youth Commission, and it's opened my eyes, coming from a position perhaps of privilege, to understand how other people do genuinely struggle. And it's the education and the communication that does start to change these attitudes that perhaps have existed in the past on behalf of police and many others alike. If we could have the next slide.
Hi, I'm Jamie and I'm 16-year-old. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story before I start the slide. So I've had first-hand experience of the criminal youth system, the youth justice system. You all know what I mean. So this kind of gives me like personal insight into what these young people are kind of going through day to day. And when I first went through the system, I really kind of lost hope for my future and kind of gave up on myself, and no one really encouraged me back then because they all gave up on me as well. But then I was recommended to apply for the Nottinghamshire Youth Commission, which I was like, I'm never going to get accepted. Why would they want someone like me? And then, well, obviously I'm here, so they accepted me. And it really showed me that lots of people do care about young people, and it gave me that hope and kind of that sense of achievement that I'm actually doing something with that experience that I had, and kind of doing something that will be good for other people that go through a similar situation as me, and really using that experience to make a better world for the next generation. So that's my story. I'm just going to start with a slide now. So we've had like a lot of achievements, and even looking at this slide, you already know that Nottinghamshire Youth Commission are just too good, and we are just on the roll all the time. And I can see everyone smiling because we are. So a few of our achievements, and there's many more, but we couldn't fit them all on, sorry guys, was we produced a film and a workshop about Know Your Rights, and that was all based around stop and search, because with our workshops and stuff, we really noticed that no one knew their rights with stop and search, and they felt really uncomfortable when they got stop and search, and it was like a major issue for young people's kind of stress and the things that they have. Young people do get stop and search like quite frequently, so they need to kind of know that they do have rights in that situation. And then another one of our achievements is we did Knife Crime and the Law. This was a film and workshop that we also did, and it included young people with lived experience of knife crime. So we really got to like connect with everyone who was kind of like listening to them speak, because they knew what they were on about. We weren't like reading out of a textbook, we were reading out of like real life experience, so we really knew what we were on about. And then we also had police recruitment. This is when members took part in a people's panel to recruit police officers, meaning that young people really got to choose who kind of patrol the streets and really connect with police officers. And I think that's really important, because young people need to connect with police officers and be able to trust them. And if they're picking them and they know how hard those police officers are trying, then they're going to trust them. I think that is really important. And we've recently received a National Diversity Award for Community Project in 2021, and I can tell you we were all ecstatic. We were all saying in the group chat how amazing we did, because we were working our butts off for that award, and I think we deserved it. And then we have a lot of opportunities for members, because we really want people to be able to work themselves up and get kind of that sense of achievement that we all kind of strive for. So we have a lot of things, to be fair, and this isn't all of it. We have so many opportunities, but one of them is once the members have gone through like a phase of the Youth Commission, they can become a part of Talent Unlocked, and that is such a great place to be. Like, I can just imagine like the sense of kind of achievement, like I said, that could give a young person. And then we also have a Youth Commission member called Katie, a little personal shout out to her, because she was a special PCSO and has recently become a police officer. So a little applause for Katie in the, and then we also have a coordinator who like, this is when a Youth Commission member has progressed. I think there's a few of them as well, have become paid members from just a volunteer, which meaning that they can really help the cause that we're striving for. And it's amazing what the Youth Commission has done for all the young people. So I have to give like a little applause to Katie, who's smiling. I can see you smiling there, just for just being such a great person and just giving like all these young people their voice.
Brilliant, thank you.
Hello everybody. Just to highlight some of the benefits of the group. On the grounds for the Police and Crime Commissioner himself, this initiative is a productive way for him to hear from young people, to hear perspectives that perhaps aren't popular, and to really put the ideas before him in a way that it can't be ignored. The support for priorities and decision making has also been done with the Youth Commission, and it's a body that's embedded into the local ways of particularly working. For the young people themselves, this does make a difference to communities and has some influential change. We have issues that perhaps people would otherwise not be able to articulate or not be able to put forward or not know where to go. So the Youth Commission is a channel for them to communicate through us, a prism to direct what's being said to those who really need to hear it. On a practical level, for many of us, there's a wide array of personal development, a valuable life experience. I know personally it's such an interesting topic and an important topic, and such a privilege to be able to speak in front of you people today about these issues that really do face a generation for us. In terms of education, there's been initiatives based around mental health compliance, and we've had training provided for this type of thing. So for members in the Youth Commission particularly, it's obviously a really important piece of education, both in life experience and in practical experience, whilst it's also giving opportunities for young people in the community to learn about these types of issues. This is evidently pressed through how some members of the Youth Commission have now become specials, PCSOs and PCs in related work, as well as paid volunteers. For the police, it's an opportunity to improve relationships with young people. The Youth Commission is a critical friend of the sounding board, and I'll go on to that in the closing statement regarding this. And there are roles such as we have some Youth Commission members do drive rounds with police, sit in the back of police cars and watch how they work. I know the Cheshire Youth Commission has opportunity with the CPS for us to observe how the CPS handle cases with those at a younger age. So there is some serious critical observations that we can make in those types of environments. And I think for the wider community, as it says on the slide, the Cheshire Youth Commission brings a diverse amount of people together. We have all different ethnicities, religions and backgrounds, and beliefs and ideas all encompassed into this one group. I think through the age itself of 14 to 25, we cover a decade and a bit of different age groups of life experience. We have people who are coming to perhaps the end of the time at the Youth Commission, and when they started, it was a very different environment in itself. And I think the Youth Commission just facilitate a collaboration between all these different organisations. And just to close, the idea that we had a question from Peter based around the report on how the Met have behaved. We understand that ideas unfortunately take generations to pass out. They take time, and we understand that the culture in many police forces isn't right and it isn't acceptable. But what the Cheshire Youth Commission and all these youth commissions look to do is to genuinely put ideas before police that they can't just pass away from. I think to put ourselves in the position of these police officers, Perhaps a belief that those issues happened, for example, with Stephen Lawrence decades ago. I think many police believe that their institution is no longer racist, and that's a huge question that needs time to develop. I think otherwise there is still a serious amount of racism within the police force. But what we look to do at the Commission is to put forward questions that can't be escaped from, that can't be passed or swept under any carpets. They have to adhere to what we're asking them, and they have to find answers. So I think, to conclude, what the Commission is a secular body, a separated power that can attempt to bring forward evidence and issues and really look to get proper answers. And it's something that I can guarantee we will continue to do throughout all the time that we're allowed to do so. I'd like to thank you all for your time and thank you for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you so much to all of you, to Shay, to Sammy and Jamie Lee, showing you some of your personal experiences as well as your experiences on the Commission. I think it's been really, really vital and valuable, and I hope people have got a lot out of it. I'm aware that I've been a really terrible chair and we're running a bit over time, and we've got two fantastic speakers talking about their work on Black, Asian, minority ethnic victims yet from the MOJ. So I do hope that people can stay a little bit longer to hear their presentation as well. But thank you so much, Leaders Unlocked. And if you want to put your details in the chat, that website that was on the last slide, that would be great, and then that would enable people to find out more. So I'm now going to quickly move on to introducing Meta Wright and Katie Kelly from the Ministry of Justice to talk about their work. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm going first. Thank you, Nina. And I think that was a tough act to follow with the Leaders Unlocked, so I'll try my best. But okay, I'm just going to try and share my screen now, if you can let me know if it works. Oh.
That's working.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so yeah, hi, my name is Meta Wright and I work on the Race and Ethnic Disparities team at MOJ. So our team was set up as a response to the recommendations set out within the LAMI review. So our team work on mainstreaming consideration of race disparity into Ministry of Justice policy making, including by supporting a small number of teams working on policies which have high risk or opportunity around race, ethnicity and faith. So there is currently a lot of debate around race at a very high level politically, and there is now genuinely a focus on it in a very practical sense. So I'll just go through the wider discourse that is happening in our space at the moment, including the key reviews we are responding to and how we're going further than those. And then Katie will then go on to talk more specifically about the minority ethnic guidance for PCCs. So as you will all be aware, the Independent Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities report was published very recently. Despite some of the arguments that have arisen regarding the report, we are trying to focus on the key themes that the report centres around, which are building trust, promoting fairness, creating agency and achieving inclusivity. As well as practical guidance such as how more distinction is needed between ethnic groups when analysing disparities, which is hindered by the use of the term Bain. So there are 24 recommendations within the CRED report, 2 of which fall to MOJ. The first relates to the use of out-of-court disposals for low-level Class B drug offences, so that's recommendation 12. And the second is developing a digital solution to support children at risk of exploitation. So that's recommendation 18. And we're also working on a couple of cross-cutting recommendations with Home Office and DFE. So they're recommendation 4 and recommendation 19. The coordination of the government response is overseen by an interministerial group led by the Minister of Equalities, along with bilateral meetings with cross-Whitehall directors. The government is currently working on a response to this, which we are publishing in July, and we have the ambition that where we can, departments are expected to go further than those recommendations. And then further elements within MOJ that we have oversight of include HMPPS and Youth Justice, who already have quite distinct programmes of work around specific disproportionality issues at quite an operational level. So the HMPPS Race Action Programme, which was born from the LAMI review, as the majority of the recommendations in the review sat with them. They now go above and beyond the spirit of the recommendations by supporting staff and service users, reviewing and enhancing learning and development, reviewing diversity and inclusion structures and policies, improving recruitment and career progression, and engaging with third sector partners. But despite the LAMI review leading to some very positive outcomes, it was very much offender focused, which meant victims didn't get the attention that they needed. So this is a key example of where MOJ wanted to develop beyond LAMI and hence created the Minority Ethnic Victims Guidance, which my colleague Katie Kelly is now going to go on to talk about.
Thank you, Meta. Also, everyone. So yeah, I'm Katie Kelly. I also work in the Ministry of Justice, but I sit in the Victim and Witness Unit of the department. So as Meta said, earlier this year we developed some guidance, which is the Bain Victims Commissioning Guidance. And basically this is because we know that there's a higher risk of victimisation from certain groups, and really just wanting to make sure that commissioners that there's best practice out there when it comes to commissioning support services that are tailored for certain groups. The guidance bit has been developed for all commissioners providing services for victims. We've primarily focused it on police and crime commissioners as a start, just so that we can really test it and get feedback from the ground, but we would then like other commissioners to be using it where it's useful also. Ultimately, we want the guidance to support commissioners ensure that services are effective, that they're strategically considered for a wide range of victims' needs. And we're going to monitor how the standards in the guidance are being used through the reporting that police and crime commissioners already provide us, so that, as I say, we can really look at where there's best practice, lean on that, but also look at where maybe more needs to be done. So, Meta, if I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. We consulted quite widely on this guidance, so what would be useful, what we needed to see in there. We consulted with PCCs, with third sector organisations, and some of the feedback that they provided is on the slide, which I'll run through now. So one of the main bits of feedback were that BAME populations are not one homogenous group, and so we need to better understand the diversity within this group and the specific barriers they face. So for instance, women and girls, and what that looks like for them, what support do they need when it comes to victim support organisations, and how that could be teased out of this guidance. The importance of qualitative data. So a lot of stakeholders said that victim support organisations who might be providing very specialist kind of community-based support, they have a wealth when it comes to case studies and qualitative rich data on what works when it comes to supporting victims, but they might not have the reams of quantitative stats that so often we look for, particularly in government. And so how can we really make the best use of that data, which is so valuable? So the case studies, the stories of change, and how can we package that together? A real need to engage victims support services, particularly the kind of by and for led sector throughout commissioning. So right at the beginning to the end, making sure that they're really part of the process. Language barriers was a bit of feedback that we received time and time again as well. Concern over interpretation availability, but not just the language that we use, but how we use it. So how are we advertising support services to victims? Where are we advertising them? And a note that where that language is, what that language is going to speak to different cohorts of victims. And so the need to really be aware of that. So we took all of that feedback, and if you turn to the next slide, Meta, we turned this into 3 quality standards, which is what the guidance is framed around. So the first one is really about needs. So how are commissioners considering and capturing the needs of BAME victims in every stage of planning and commissioning? Really taking note that the services that are out there will be the local experts. So how can we rely on them to know what communities need and how can we deliver it as best we can? This is all about building an understanding of local populations, what their main issues are, what the community needs are. The second standard is around barriers, so commissioners providing services that proportionately reflect the BAME demographics of their local communities, awareness of specific interventions working. We know that BAME-led, specific, often smaller support organisations really work. So what can we do more there? A note that, you know, we expect everything to be human rights-based, victims-based, and kind of cool to look inwardly at commissioners' own teams. So are they reflective of the demographics that they're serving in that area? The third standard is around awareness. So commissioners evidencing that they are promoting victim services in their areas. It's about building trust. How are we getting the message out there? Effective outreach, you know, where are we putting the advertising? Is it community centres? Is it social media? Really rethinking the venues that we're trying to engage communities in and making sure that they work. That's where they are. And a note that services are separate from police. So, you know, police and crime commissioners, you don't need to have reported a crime, and just making sure that that's coming out in the comms that we're using. So the next steps on the guidance is already out with police and crime commissioners, which is great. And we expect to see kind of how best practice is being used to meet those quality standards when we get our reporting in at the kind of midpoint of the year. So it'll be really interesting to see and follow up with them then. As I say, we then hope that it can be used by more people, and we're really committed to making it an iterative process. So kind of any feedback on the document from PCCs, we'll be building it in and speaking to other stakeholders about just how we can use it best. You know, we don't want it to be a bit of guidance that sits on the shelf. So we've spoken to some PCCs about, you know, would a training event be useful? Would some supportive best practice on this is how, you know, we've done it in X location could be useful. So all of that, you know, is to come, but we're really pleased with the document as a kind of 1.0 version, and very happy to take any questions if we've got time. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. And yeah, like I said, being involved in those discussions from the beginning, really great to see that come into fruition now. So I'm thinking, because we're a little bit over, if people have got any questions about that specific guidance, if they can email Jamie from the Criminal Justice Alliance, and we'll pass those messages on. I know there's been lots of requests in the chat for all the slides to be sent through, and all the kind of links that people have mentioned. So we'll do that piece of work and put together the slides. We'll put together the, you know, sort of any links and useful reading that has been mentioned throughout this event, and send that out to all attendees. So I just want to say a big thank you very much, and Jamie's just put his email in the chat if anyone wants to ask questions that we want to pass on to Katie and Kelly, to Meta and Katie rather, or to Leaders Unlocked. So yeah, it just leaves me to say thank you so much to all our speakers today. It's been a really timely discussion, and I hope it's had some lots of food for thought for people. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I was just going to say, if people have things that they are going to go away and do as a result of this, it would be great if you could just pop that in the chat. So whether that might be going to look up one of the organisations that you've heard about today, whether that's going back to, you know, your manager or police and crime commissioner or someone in your organisation, to do that, please do take away and make a positive action, because, as I said, the name of this series was Time to Act. So hopefully we could all take away at least one action from this meeting today. But thank you once again to all our speakers for a really inspiring morning. It certainly cheered up my morning, even though it's raining outside. Lots of positivity, lots of ideas for going forward. So thank you very much, and thank you to all our attendees for coming today. Thanks very much. Goodbye.